Hello, August Falcha, or hello and welcome. My name is Parker McDaniel, and today I'm going to be giving you 3 reasons why Scotland should be a free and independent nation separated from the United Kingdom. But before we get into it, I want to tell you why I, a SoCal native, even care about this. Well, you see, my grandfather was born and still lives in England, so growing up I had a very English-oriented background. But my girlfriend Claire was born, raised, and goes to school in her home of Glasgow, Scotland. These might seem like unimportant facts to you, but these are two of the most important connections in my life, and I've been exposed to both pros and cons of Scottish independence since I was a wee little lad. But after listening to both sides of the argument, I can definitively say that Scotland should be independent from the United Kingdom because of differences in culture, lack of representation in Parliament, and economic advantages that sovereign Scotland would get. In this speech, I'll go over distinct cultural differences between both Scotland and the UK, Scotland's lack of fair representation in Parliament, and the specific economic advantages that Scotland would face if they were independent. So let's get into the culture part, which isn't even a new topic. In fact, Scotland has hated the UK, and by extension England, since its almost very creation. One example of this can be seen with their national animal, the unicorn. They're called, this might seem like a weird national animal to have, but part of the reason is because a unicorn is the only animal, according to Norse mythology, that could kill a lion, the national animal of England. Today, the best demonstration of these two cultural differences would be most obviously seen through their political alignments, as Scotland is a very liberal country, where England is a very conservative country. And this divide is growing as James Cameron was elected the new Prime Minister of England, someone who's extremely conservative. And as CBS News correspondent Mark Phillips put it, Cameron's problem is he's seen in Scotland as the personification of everything wrong with England and the UK. Another example of modern-day cultural disputes would be from England's nuclear arms program Trident. Despite thinking the Scots love war and are just some Vikings, they actually hate it, and they hate nuclear arms as well. But when England decided to make Scotland the host of all their nuclear weapons, understandably, Scottish people were pretty upset. But despite the public desire to not carry arms, their political arms were tied due to the country's lack of fair representation within British Parliament. One of the key reasons that Scotland wants to self-govern itself is because of this lack of representation in Parliament, something that we Americans know a little bit about. To give you some examples, though, British Parliament is made up of 650 seats, exactly, and it functions exactly like the legislative branch of the United States for the most part. But as of 2019, out of those 650 seats, only 59 represent Scotland. This underrepresentation allows for Parliament to pass laws that will directly affect Scotland and go against their will, like the aforementioned Trident example. But one very important example would be back in 2016 with the vote of Brexit, or the vote that the United Kingdom should leave the EU, or the European Union. Scotland voted to stay in the European Union, and in Scotland, the vote was over 60% majority, which is pretty much a landslide. However, because of Scotland's low and lack of political representation within Parliament, their outcry to stay in the European Union was almost unheard, as Brexit passed in as of 2016. The United Kingdom is working to actually leave the European Union officially. Another example of Scotland's voice not being heard would be Scotland's oil campaign, which started back in 1974, and it called for Parliament to stop heavily taxing their oil. But despite a public outcry and overwhelming majority for Scottish people to own their own oil, Parliament won't let them to this day. As Prime Minister Cameron stated, the North Sea oil is profitable for Westminster, but a problem for Scotland. This assumes that Scotland wouldn't even know what to do with their own oil, and if left to make own decisions for themselves, Scotland wouldn't be financially successful. And this just isn't true. Scotland is one of the most wealthy nations, not even in the UK, but in the entire European Union. And in relation to the UK, as according to the Fraser and Alexander Institute, Scotland has a higher GDP per capita than the UK for the past 25 years. Scotland's oil, this financial success would only continue as Scotland would become an independent nation, as Scottish oil makes up a vast majority of their GDP. But if they were to get full control over it, they would get almost 90% of all the taxes on it, allowing them to further develop their country and economic status. However, the reliance on oil is not an entirely positive outlook to some, as Griff White, a reporter for the Washington Post, fears that once Scotland oil reserve runs dry, they're going to be dead in the water. To further this point, Griff White quotes John McLaren, an energy economics with Fiscal Affairs Scotland, stating, "The early to mid 1980s was when Scotland would have done extremely well if when it had all the oil, but there is no prospect of getting anything like it was in the past." And while White and McLaren both want the best for the citizens of Scotland and England, they would be also correct in saying that Scottish oil reserves are extremely important to the country. As in 2014, the Scottish government said that their GDP was almost 15% pure oil. However, Griffin McLaren are assuming that Scotland, without oil, wouldn't know what to do with themselves and would run out of oil. Both of these just aren't true. Firstly, Scottish government reported back in 2012 that their oil reserves are estimated worth of $1.5 trillion. That is enough to last over 100 years. Secondly, Scotland's economy is only oil-based for the short-term future, with long-term plans to become more of a natural resource-dependent country, focusing solely on wind. In fact, according to the Scottish government, Scottish's wind power is the fastest growing renewable resource, as in 2019, it was a record year for renewable energy generation, which increased 8.5% when compared to 2018. These examples are just a few of the many reasons why Scotland would not just be okay as an independent nation, but would thrive from their independence. In conclusion, I hope I have demonstrated to you the cultural differences between Scotland and the United Kingdom, Scotland's lack of fair representation in Parliament, and some of the economic advantages Scotland would gain with sovereignty. Together, we learned about the specific key cultural differences between England and Scotland. We learned about how specifically they are underrepresented in Parliament, and how the Scottish economy would benefit should they succeed. But if these reasons aren't enough to convince you that Scotland should be a sovereign nation, let me show you how you, as an American, could be affected by this. If Scotland were able to become an independent economy, independent nation, their economy would raising the value of the pound. Raising the value of the pound would increase the value of the American dollar, increasing our economy as well. So Scotland's sovereignty can only help to benefit us all. Thank you.